Hello there guys, Teacher Krishna here and welcome to our next class for the 4th unit. This is a class that is part of the high school and 9th BYS. We are working on the subject biology and on week number 28, so be welcomed. Let's go over our presentation and let's start with our end in mind, which is the following. Students will be able to use Canva to synthesize the content from lesson 1. Alright, and here you have a summary of activities. What do you have to do today? Number 1, read lesson number 1, of course. Number 2, access the platform of Canva and synthesize the topic in a graphic organizer. Number 3, complete the book exercises. And number 4, make a compilation of your work and upload it to Educativa. So, very important. Today you don't have to make a summary itself, but you are going to be working with a graphic organizer in Canva. Okay. So in order to do that, please access canva.com, and you're going to find graphic organizers such as the one that you can see right here, in which you can write down the title in the middle of our graphic organizer, and in the surroundings you can write down several important information about the topic. It's very important that you include this mind map in your notebook. So if you have a printer, you can make it in Canva, then you print it out, and you include it in your notebook, of course. But just in case you don't have a printer, you can directly draw the mind map in your notebook. So you decide what's best for you. Very important to notice as well is that I'm going to be checking 3 aspects, of course. I'm going to check creativity, research, and spelling and grammar. So for creativity is original and thought and demonstrate a knowledge of the project expectations. And regarding research exceeds the required level of understanding. And lastly, in spelling and grammar, excellent use of standard English with minimal or no mistakes. All right, so let's start with our lesson for today. And we're going to talk about Darwin's theory. So Darwin's theory is something extremely interesting to analyze because it is related to evolution, to natural selection, and of course to several fossils, just like the one that you can see right here. So in 1831, Darwin was on board of the 5-year sail trip around the world. So what's interesting about this theory was that Darwin went on a trip all around the world for 5 years, and he was observing many different species from around. He noticed some similarities, some differences around the species, and that's the way he started developing all of his theory. And he noticed something very important: diversity. Darwin was astonished about the diversity of animals around the world, and the fact that they were so different from the ones in England. So Darwin is it comes from England, but you know that depending on what region of the world, you are going to find several species. For example, if we talk about a native species in Guatemala, we can talk about the quetzal. So it is a very beautiful bird with a very long tail, which our people used to call it the flying snake because of how large his tail would be. But if you go anywhere else in the planet, you are not going to find the quetzal. And something similar happened to Darwin when he was observing the species. He was observing that they were pretty different from the ones he was from. And species, what is a species? A group of similar organisms that can make among each other and produce offspring. So I can talk about the species of quetzal. That is one of them. We can talk about chimpanzees, we can talk about monkeys, horses. Those are examples of different species. All right, we also have fossils, a preserved remain of an organism that lived in the past. Just like the one that you can see right over here, this is an example of a prehistoric sloth, but it was way larger than the ones that we can see right now, and that was related to Darwin's theory as well. Darwin observed the skeletons of a species that was so similar to a sloth, but much larger. So here you go. Right here at the bottom, you can see a small a picture of a sloth, and right next to it you have the fossil. So you can notice the difference between a sloth from nowadays and this sloth is gigantic. So he started wondering, how is it possible that sloths were quite larger before and now they are not? So let's continue. And in part of his trip, he went to the Galapagos Island, and he started analyzing the organisms that he found there. And something that caught his attention was about the shells of the turtles. So just like you can see right over here, the shapes of the shells of the turtles are quite different. So while the ones that you see right here are, let's say, they're different in shape, as they don't have this opening for the turtle to actually extend his neck to it. The ones from different islands actually have this opening, so they can actually mobilize their neck and head around. So what he noticed was that depending on what island he will analyze, he will find different turtles or different types of shells. And Darwin also says in his report about the diversity, he mentions that he was talking to one police officer or for one guard from around the islands. And he told him that he will be able to identify where each turtle will come from just by looking at their shells. So one more time, this definitely called his attention. And the Beagle, which is the boat where he was part of, visited several coasts from South America, and then it arrived at the Galapagos Island. Darwin noticed there were a lot of very noticeable similarities and differences between the organisms from the organisms of the island and from the coast of South America. That's another thing. He was visiting the coast of South America, and he went to the Galapagos Islands, and he noticed several similarities. But he was wondering, well, one more time, these species have very important similarities as well as differences. So how is it possible? Oh, he concluded that species had changed from their mainland relatives over time. So basically, this means that all these species share a main relative. So there was like the original bird, let's say, or the original turtle. But after they made it a lot of times, they were adapting to their environment. And of course, they were changing little by little until we will get differences such as the ones in the turtle shells, in which one of them doesn't have an opening, and some others actually do have an opening right here. And it is related to some other effects that he found about as well. So here are some important discoveries. So he was observing the beak of the birds in several locations around the world. And just like you can notice, each one of the birds has a different beak. One of them has a way larger but smaller, another one which is smaller in every side of the world, and some others are way bigger as well as thicker. So why does that happen? Darwin discovered several differences in the species along the islands. He noticed that the tortoises had different shells depending on what island they grew up on. He noticed changes in the birds from several locations. He noticed that their beak shape will change depending on what their main source of feeding would be. He came to the conclusion that all types of birds came from the same ancestor, but they had adapted over time to survive to their living conditions. So I really liked a picture that is shown in your book. So you can go right there when you are reading the topic. And what I noticed was that the harder the food that birds had to consume, the larger their beak will become. So for example, in bird number 3, where you have a very small beak, he will eat actually very simple things such as very soft fruits or very soft nuts as well. But when they had to consume like way harder elements, their peak will turn bigger, such as invert number of one. So take a little bit of time to analyze the feeding of each one of the birds to actually understand a little bit more about the Darwin's conclusions. All right, so that'll be about it for today. As long as I remember, yeah, that's correct. So thank you guys for coming to our lesson. And I will see you in a couple of minutes during our Zoom session. So it's been great seeing you around. Goodbye, and always take care.